All right. I'm going to try and answer this question today. And you'll see that it's going to take us on a bit of a journey. I don't know if any of you are fans of Coldplay, but last year in their festival with 210,000 people, they invited Michael J. Fox to play with them because they had established the group as a result of Back to the Future, the movie he featured in. If you look carefully at that circle, that's Michael J. Fox kicking up in the air at the peak of the performance. And what he said after this was, what you've given me can't be measured. And that's why I'm interested in the field of evaluation. How do you measure things like that? For those of you who are fans, at the end of this presentation, there's a QR code for this video clip that's been seen 70 million times as of this week. So this is the hub of my presentation, is this drawing. In West Africa, they refer to this as the word tree. That's where people come together to figure out how to do things. So we'll be returning to that theme quite a bit. This is the outline of the presentation today. I want to give you a background on the field of evaluation and how it's evolving. Then I want to share a discovery that I came across in preparing for this presentation, which is an existing network for evaluating One Health. Then I'm going to backtrack and explain why it's important in this field of one evaluation to think in different ways, including visually. And then I'm going to cover the evaluation framework based on experiences I've done, and end with an example of an evaluation we're supporting in One Health in Asia and Africa right now. So this is the structure. So assuming most of you on this call are not evaluators, but many of you have a background in research. Just to contrast what researchers do versus evaluators. Researchers generate new knowledge while evaluators provide information for decision making. Research is very often research focused, whereas evaluation is partner or stakeholder focused. Research is hypothesis based. Evaluation is based on key questions. The methods and analysis are often shared. Researchers make recommendations. Evaluators make recommendations based on key questions. Researchers publish results, and hopefully evaluations get used. Just a quick tour over the different kinds of evaluation that practitioners like myself face. I had to use this cartoon because we were in the Ontario Vet College. But formative evaluations is what you do at the end of a project. At the end of a phase of a project. So it's like when the chef updates the menu every season. Summative evaluation is what you do at the end of the project, or it's when the customer tells the chef what they thought about the food. And the kind of evaluation that I'm increasingly involved with many of my colleagues is developmental evaluation, which is when the chef tastes the food during preparation, or when you keep on adjusting the project. And I have a feeling, and I'm not an expert in One Health, that One Health needs all three of them, but mostly the middle one. The field of evaluation has also been evolving. So it started off, conventional evaluation focused on accountability, a lot of quantitative indicators, assumptions of linear thinking and predictability. But it came under some critiques, because as you know, statistics can be manipulated. It has then moved into things that are more difficult to measure. And so in the last few years, there's been an acknowledgement of complexity, unpredictability, and more participatory approaches. And more recently, there's been a growing interest in accompanying multidisciplinary, multi-stakeholder adaptive exercises. And basically, there's a huge effort in finding ways for evaluation to accompany adaptive management. And the latest trend from blue marble evaluation, a movement started in the US by Michael Quinn Patton, is to integrate evaluation into as an agent of transformative systems. So not a neutral observer, but a participant in change. The more conventional field evaluation often covers these 6 criteria: relevance, coherence, effectiveness, efficiency, impact, and sustainability. Those are the more standard criteria that requests for proposals will cover. But as we will see in the areas of complex work and One Health, we need to go beyond them. So this is a table that I'm surprised to see was produced by Michael Quinn-Patton 19 years ago. On the left, you can see the features of conventional or traditional evaluations, where you want to render a definitive judgment of success or failure, where evaluators are coming in as outsiders, where you're seeking to generalize findings. It's very much accountability oriented. And on the right side is where developmental evaluation is pushing and gaining more ground. And in this presentation, I will show you how some of these features on the right side, such as designing evaluations to capture system dynamics, have gained ground. And I have a sense that there's a nice fit for developmental evaluation in the field of evaluation in One Health. By the way, all the references in this presentation I have included in a handout that I've sent to Peter so they can be shared with you. So this is the quandrum of evaluation. Projects that start thinking very much linearly when reality in the outside is way more complex. And so I don't know if you see that, but I just snuck in One Health into the red spaghetti because that's where my understanding is One Health belongs there. So I'm going to backtrack a little bit and start with something totally unexpected, maybe in the presentation on One Health, which is the idea of categorizing complexity. In the 1940s, somebody in the US started to try to organize all the different artists that they knew into a family tree. First thing I noticed was the group of 7 wasn't there. So this is, very quickly you see that this is an American perspective on the world of artists. But it was an attempt to start organizing complexity. Fast forward a little bit, and here's the next version of the tree. And what I like about this drawing is not only have they gone beyond the first simplicity one, they've gone international, and they've started to add all kinds of details. You probably can't see this on the screen, but there's a weight holding down the branch that says Mexican art. So the Mexicans are pulling that branch down. They're starting to use symbols. They're even giving you free labels so you can add your own. So it's a participatory mapping of artists. So I thought that this, because I'm a visual thinker, this caught my eye. The black labels are actually Pepsi-Cola prices that some artists had won. Never heard of that. Well, guess what? The field of evaluation has its own tree. This is the first one that I saw in 2008. I'm going to focus on the left branch, which is utilization-focused. The same authors that produced this tree produced a more recent tree. And I've circled utilization and developmental evaluation, which is the area that I've chosen to move into, but there's many very good evaluators working along the other branches. More recently, somebody came up with a periodic table of evaluation. So for those of you who have a chemical background, you will find this quite intriguing. Once again, developmental and utilization-focused evaluation find a home in the middle, which is, as you can see on the right, it says room for negotiation. This is where different actors can agree on what the evaluation's for. On the left side is mostly the more conventional, predefined evaluation. There's a whole paper on this, so I won't delve into it, but it's quite fascinating to see this. Since 2009, I've been co-leading a project funded by IDRC where we've been providing evaluation and communication training to researchers. using utilization-focused evaluation, which is basically a decision-making framework. I've brought hard copies for anybody who's interested, and we have this publication available in 3 languages on our website. Basically, it is a mechanism by which, if you think from One Health, the multiple different institutions and individuals can become part of the evaluation design. So it's a very collaborative approach. Coming back to One Health, this network of evaluation for One Health, which is mostly European, has come up with a framework. And they're seeking proof of concept. So I thought this was quite interesting to share with the One Health Institute because it's an area that is quite new. The framework that I'm going to share with you is from 2018. And I've been in touch with one of the main authors, Simon Rueg, in Switzerland, and he's very keen to find partners to test drive this approach. One of the publications is co-published by 26 authors. When I started my PhD in the interdisciplinary program in rural studies, a bunch of us radical students said to the profs that we wanted to do a joint paper. And they said, you can't do that, how can we grade you? I wish I'd had this to show to them, because I think students need to learn to co-write. There's 26 different institutions in this paper. I don't know how they did that. The framework has basically 4 components. A definition of what the One Health initiative is all about, and I'm going to show you how complex that is. Description of the theory of change, or the expected trajectory of evolution of the initiative. It has emphasis on process evaluation, so that's my cup of tea. And then it has an assessment of One Healthness, which is totally new to me. And this is what it looks like. Can't cover all of it, but I'm going to highlight sections of it. The first element on the top is about defining and describing the One Health initiative, the system, the boundaries, the stakeholders, the subsystems. The second element is focusing on the theory of change, and I'm going to give you examples of what it's like to do that collaboratively. The third one is looking at the institutional and structural environment. How do the different organizations that come together function as a collaborative? And the last one is a comparison between the One Healthness and the outcomes, which I have yet to really fully understand. But I'm going to walk you through 1, 2, 3, using examples of things I've done that I'm thinking I can plug into how I would do this, starting with the top one. And so, as some of you practitioners in One Health would have noticed, defining the boundaries and figuring out who are the stakeholders is quite complex. I'm a visual thinker, so this cartoon tells it all. One person is thinking One Health is a flower, all the other ones are understanding it differently. One Health is a topic, is a theme, is a theory, is what? So as soon as we bring people together, we're going to have to address different ways of knowing. We're going to have to get involved in stakeholder analysis, except that even the word stakeholder is now problematic among indigenous groups in our country. They prefer partners or allies. So I even had to cross that off because this is new from the last Canadian Evaluation Society conference that I was at. But in figuring out who to engage is a very political process. People are affected, people have power. We tried this out several times. This is an example in Northern Ontario. I find it interesting that both examples here are Canadian. This one is a Quebec one. You can see that youth in the middle left is highly affected, but has moderate influence. Same thing happened in Northern Ontario. Youth came out on the left. And so some of the stakeholders will be highly affected by an initiative, but have very little power. So you need to figure out who convenes, who brings them in, how do you balance out power? And who runs the event? The workshop on the left, we did literally during 9/11 in Mozambique, trying to engage people in figuring out the configuration of a problem. In this case, this was a water project. The one on the right, this is the late Les Meekes working with us in Northern Ontario. Again, engaging in multi-stakeholder planning. So I used the hand over the stick statement from Robert Chambers, which is at one point, you have to get those stakeholders to tell you the story so you understand what they've understood and how they perceive it. This is something I did years ago in Colombia because I was trying to figure out, as I was talking to government planners, that what I was thinking when I was talking about farming and what they were thinking, the same words were different. And I'll tell you a story of how this became even more dramatic. This is a booklet we produced when we built this farm in northern Colombia. This is going back a few decades. And because I wasn't a very good illustrator of people, because I'd never studied art, when I made this drawing, I had to take a picture of Susana milking the goats. I went back. Kevin, you'll like this one because it's a media story. Projected the slide, traced it, went back to the farm, made this drawing, trying to explain why we were putting the goats into confinement and all these other benefits of the confinement. And then I showed the picture to the farmers, and the response was, that's not Susana because she wasn't milking that day. And I said to them, it is Susana. What's it to do with the day? And then I realized people know things differently. That's why I got so interested in how people learn. So, moving on. If you manage to get people to agree on the boundaries of the system, how do you agree on the strategy for implementing something as complex as One Health? This is how I started my PhD in Guelph some years ago at a meeting at the Arboretum with all the stakeholders we could bring together on figuring out how to research rural and remote telecom in Ontario. So bring them in, see how they perceive the complexity. Some years ago, a book was published by Checklin and Scholes, and it's called Soft Systems Methodology, and one of the tools is rich pictures. This diagram was produced by mostly African students in the Netherlands to illustrate how they understood the sustainable use of scarce groundwater in the Netherlands. Even back then, the Dutch were suffering with some loss of water in a very wet country. But this is a rich picture. This is a way to illustrate complexity in one go. For some time, we had some work with colleagues in East Africa, and we were able to bring in multiple stakeholders to see if we could improve agricultural knowledge and extension in East Africa. And this was a 9-day workshop with 40 stakeholders to figure out how to improve, in this case, ag knowledge and extension. The trick was getting people to work with tools that were common to different stakeholders, so they had to be visual. This is a co-op representative explaining how the marketing of coffee happens in Kenya. And it was incredible watching other stakeholders realize things they hadn't known, and because this was a visualization of a very complex system of knowledge and produce exchange. This is work in Northern Ontario again, in health. This was a multi-stakeholder event to engage the community in figuring out how to bring in high-speed internet into remote communities that had no phones at the time. Stakeholder analysis on the right, who's there, and at the bottom, who's missing. And on the left, what are their expectations? So start by listening to what people think this is all about so you can have a common ground. And then we invented this tool, we called it a spray diagram. We said, if we came back to Deer Lake in 5 years and health was better, what would it look like? And they told us. So on the left, you can see better evaluation, better health in Deer Lake. We started to classify it in colors, so results, native language and culture issues, facilities, programs. We did it also on education and economic development. We then tidied up the diagram so we could all read in one direction. And we started classifying things so you could see there were visions or results in large blue bubbles. There were the programs that currently existed in green. There the sticky notes were the measurables, the indicators. And in red were activities that could be enabled by high-speed internet. That was the one in education, that was the one in economic development. 1 day per picture, 5 days in the community. And then we had to translate this so that Industry Canada would understand that this was actually a planning exercise. So you have to often speak visual and table language. Now, what's a theory of change? It's in the framework, this is a very important component. Theory of change is this story that goes from inputs to activities to outputs to outcomes to impact, showing what leads to what. And the most interesting thing is the green arrows. And not many theories of change are so good as this one in putting in the assumptions of what does it take for something to happen that is often outside of your control. For instance, in this case, which is a theory of change for clearing mines, one of the assumptions is the assets are not misappropriated, that the national authority has sufficient will and backing to improve. It's all these things that happen on the side, that if you don't acknowledge them, they may surprise you. So a good theory of change is very full of assumptions. This is one that we did with the Canadian Food Grains Bank in East Africa a couple of years ago with about 20 people. And it was for the Nature Plus program. I think the Nature Plus program has a lot of affinity with One Health. And so, again, we struggle to organize this. As you go to the right, there's the time frame. As you go to the top, you're going from outputs to outcomes. We had to tidy it up. But in the end, everything you see in the pink diamonds are assumptions. So, and it was done collaboratively. Not easy, not clean, but better than nothing. Now, coming back to the framework that I shared with you for One Health, evaluation of One Health, they're doing the same thing. In this case, this is a representation of an initiative on antimicrobial resistance. You can see the legend. It's very detailed. There's back arrows going back and forth. They've taken a lot of effort to do this. They've then, in the same publication, added a theory of change in this format. You can see different types of arrows, dotted ones, three-way, two-way, black, gray, trying to figure out causality, direction, feedback loops. So describing what the initiative is expected to be like is a huge challenge. And that was on the right side. You can see theory of change. In this case, then they go on to define impact evaluation, economic evaluation, nonlinear impact evaluation. You go down, disciplinary outcomes, interdisciplinary outcomes, One Health outcomes. I'm going to lean on the left now, which is the assessment of One Healthness, which is the operations in the infrastructure. And so again, sharing stories of things we've done that may speak to this. So this is going back quite a while when I was working with FAO. We were working with farmers in the Philippines trying to figure out if you're going to improve agricultural extension, what's already in place? Who do they talk to? So we improvised this diagram to ask them, who did you talk to in the last few months? And came up with this stakeholder network map showing how if you look at the bottom, barangay is the village level. See the farmer in the middle. See so many horizontal interconnections and then a lot of vertical ones. Then we went up one level and did the same exercise and so on. Fast forward to a project in Chile, South America, a conflict in the fisheries. We started the workshop by asking people in unique groups to visualize the institutional configuration of the fisheries in the Philippines, in Chile. The top left one is the artisanal fishers. The top right is the government. The bottom left is the professional and consultants, and the one on the right side are the academics. Same reality, 4 different visualizations. When this happened, at the coffee break, I heard the artisanal fishermen saying, we should stay in this workshop even if the big industry people didn't show up, because I'm very curious why we see the world so different. Later in the workshop, we got them working in mixed groups once they had agreed on a common vision. The people on the top left and on the bottom right are already mixed groups negotiating organizational configurations for an integrated way forward. The last seminar with Daniel was here. He talked about the Midland Conservation Authority couple of decades ago now, we started working with Phil Beard and Rod McRae and trying to do the same thing. And this is one of the projects now in Ontario that is going to be working on One Health. Phil Beard has been very involved with the One Health Institute. So then one way of working with mixed groups is what's called living labs. It's like live experiments where multiple institutions try something else. Well, I discovered that in Europe there's a living lab network, and they've come up with an evaluation framework for the living lab, and it looks like a Rubik's Cube. And one of the interesting things is they showed on the left, you can see that there's 3 stages of setting up a living lab or a multi-partner One Health initiative. There's a setup, sustainability, scalability. You have different evaluation questions at each stage. And then you go into governance and service creation, innovation, and so on. It starts getting this complex. And so one of the challenges with evaluating a living lab is at what stage do we involve who in figuring out what. And so this area is, in Europe, the network of living labs has taken off with this because they're certifying living labs based on these criteria. Back to Kenya. This is my colleague Reg Noble, trying to figure out how we're going to measure that multi-stakeholder work in East Africa. So many of you are familiar with these diagrams. This is one of the takeaways from this presentation, which is increasingly in this work, we end up becoming guides for stakeholders or partners to make choices on all of these different dimensions of evaluation. A few years ago with the McConnell Foundation in Montreal, we tried to figure out how to use the Sustainable Livelihoods Framework, which is maybe familiar to some of you. It's quite well established, but a little bit out of date. But we were trying to figure out how we could get multiple partners to evaluate value chains using this framework. So if you look at the middle of the framework, it talks about livelihood assets. So it talks about human capital, natural capital, financial capital, social capital, and physical capital. Then on the right, it talks about governance and institutional issues as well. We focused on those 5 capitals and got them, and this is with the Ecology Action Center in Halifax, we got them to figure out for a value chain in the fisheries in Nova Scotia, what were the physical assets, the human assets, and so on. So this is what they came up with, including the financial ones. As I was working on this, I had to get help from an economist at McConnell because I couldn't do the financial ones. That's the nature of this work. You have to get allies because you can't cover it all. But if you look at the list on the physical on the left, and it's boats, equipment, wharf, ice, bait, so on, we then put it onto a spreadsheet on the left. So those are copied on the top. And then we got the different stakeholders in the value chain to rank the variables and weight them. So you can do that. It's very laborious. And we only got started with this. You can see the chart on the right was the baseline. And so it can be done. A challenge is resources because it's hugely time consuming. This is current work that we're doing through a European project. Santé en Territoire is a project by CIRAD in Montpellier. They're working in Benin, Senegal, Cambodia, and Laos. And they're introducing living labs under One Health. And we've been able to work with them from the start in helping them figure out how to introduce developmental evaluation as they set up the living lab under One Health. So this is as far as I've got on this framework. One of the things we did is we started to produce guides for practitioners on how to do developmental evaluation. There's the one on the right side we co-produced with a project from CIRAD on how to do developmental evaluation of these multi-stakeholder platforms. So this is all work that is quite recent. This is the actual living lab workshop in Cambodia taking place. And we've been working with one of their, or two of their team members in helping the different stakeholders, who are mostly farmers, extension workers, local government, and researchers, how to build in agroecological strategies using a One Health lens, and how to start evaluating the process from the beginning. There's a story of change in a book that was just published a couple of weeks ago, telling the story of this one if you're interested in it. And this is what they've designed. They've come up with 4 evaluation uses on the left to improve circulation of information and knowledge. Second, to document and learn from the experiment process. The experiments meaning the composting experiments that they're doing for farmers to improve soil health. To document and improve the involvement of actors, that's the stakeholder part. And to analyze the creation of local knowledge. And then from that, they have key evaluation questions, and from that, a list of evidence needed. We were in touch with them a couple of weeks ago as they're working on refining this. So this is still work in progress. And finally, the 4th element is one that I cannot share with you in detail because I have never gotten that far. As Simon Rook said to me, they're inviting people to try this out and probably refine this. So finally, the takeaways, and this I was thinking mostly for the One Health Institute for students here at Guelph and for other practitioners. The takeaways of this presentation is operationalizing One Health means partner engagement that benefits from participatory inquiry, that enables multi-partner platforms or living labs, for collective learning as a foundation to evaluate outcomes and process and impacts. That's a mouthful, but that's the takeaway. And as I mentioned, increasingly we find ourselves becoming guides to help partners make choices across a growing number of variables. And I've added in brackets the most tricky thing, which is end budgets. A lot of this work is enormously labor-intensive, time-intensive. And so one of the jobs we as evaluators have to do very often, as is the case with the project in Cambodia, is to go back and come up with priorities and boil this down to what is doable within resources. So coming back to the old table I showed you at the beginning, you can see now that there is potential to work on the complex developmental evaluation on the side. But it means starting from the beginning. It means having a lot of work with stakeholder engagement with people of different knowledge systems, an enormous effort in theory of change and figuring out how is this going to be designed. And so in the end, evaluation and One Health need to start together. And so the answer to the question was, how can evaluation contribute to One Health? Well, by becoming a partner in transformation. Easier said than done, as you can see. If any of you want to see that Coldplay video, there's the QR code and my email in case any of you want to reach out to me with information. Again, any of you online who want the list of references, I'll be happy to share that. And I understand this recording will be available online in a couple of days. Thank you.